Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to have you here. My name's Anna. I'm the Director of Marketing for All Points North Lodge, and this is the All Points North Lodge virtual speaker series. So if you're new to All Points North Lodge, we are a behavioral health campus in Vail, Colorado, just outside, and we also have telehealth therapy. So we do addiction treatment, trauma therapy, mental health, and we really believe that whether you come on campus with us, you're a friend or a family member of someone who's on campus with us, you're working with us virtually, or you just come to our website and we never meet you face to face, you deserve to be supported, to be cared for, and to have resources for recovery and mental health. So this is that. This is a free initiative to be able to provide stories and experiences for you that push you forward in your recovery or forward in your mental health. So today I'm very, very excited to have Christopher Heimerman. And before we get started, just a few quick notes. So we will be taking questions throughout this session. So if you have questions, there's a Q&A box on your screen. You can drop the question in your Q&A box. That will just go to me and to the other panelists. And so you'll be able to send in those questions and they will not show your name to anybody except the panelists. So we'll do those questions at the end. So you can do that throughout the chat. You are also welcome to put your questions in the chat or to talk amongst yourselves in the chat. However, your name will show up. So change your name to anonymous right now if you'd like to protect your own privacy. And we'll go ahead and get started. So Christopher is a podcaster, he's a writer, he is a distance runner. And when I say distance, I do mean far distances. And some of the things that we've heard from him already in preparing for this episode are just astounding, the way that he has come so far in his recovery journey and is inspiring others now. So as you're listening, make sure you tune into him afterward on his podcast and his events. So he hid his addiction for many years from his friends and family. He knows what that's like. He knows what it's like to go through treatment and to really feel like, okay, my life is totally different than how I want it to be. And so he is here today to share his story. So as he comes in here, I want to give a special welcome to Christopher. I also want to give a special welcome to all of the guests at the lodge who are joining us. If you are watching on site, on campus in Edwards, we're so glad to have you here. Honored that you're trusting us with your care. And then I also want to say a special welcome to the telehealth clients and our alumni who are joining us from all over the country. We are so excited to have all of you here. Welcome. And I'm going to hand it right over to Christopher to get started. Christopher, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for all of those kind and flattering words. Thank you to All Points North Lodge for having me. Thanks to everybody for giving me an excuse to wear a tie for the first time in months, I think. And, you know, I wish I could be there with you folks. That would be absolutely terrific. But I'd also be lying if I told you it isn't nice that I get to do this speech while wearing my Scooby-Doo yoga pants. It's very nice, very comfortable. And guys, this is just an absolute privilege and an honor. And we all know that this morning I made a very bad decision, and we all know that we're going to have bad decisions, and we're going to have bad ideas. And it's just a matter of if we make the decision to act on them, right? So I'm thinking that my girls, I had about 45 minutes before I had to take them to school. And so I'm thinking, okay, let's do this last run through of the speech. Let's sneak that in before I take them to school. And so I come up to the studio, and I get 3 minutes in, and there's screaming and yelling downstairs. One of the children was singing a song that the other one didn't like. And so there was hitting involved, maybe some light hair pulling. So I went down there and broke that up. Come back upstairs. My phone rings, and I recognize it as an Australia phone number. Hang with me. Travis Eastman is a friend of mine from Australia who just launched a 12-week recovery program. I've had him on the podcast recently, and he's quickly become a very good friend of mine. So it rings, but I'm like, no, I need to rehearse this thing. I got to be ready for this keynote speech. And it rings again. So I pick it up and I answer it, and he's not there. I'm like, okay, well, now I can get back to this. Then I get the little bing on my screen, and he's like, hey, mate, I just wanted to talk through some stuff. Can you give me a call? So I call him. And at this point, I'm frustrated because it's like, I want to be ready for you guys. And he says, mate, I want to talk with you about imposter syndrome. And when you get sober, you start noticing all of these little serendipitous events, all these borderline creepy things that the universe hands you, where they're coincidences. They seem like too coincidental to be true, too ironic to be true. And so it's rather hilarious that my friend Travis was reaching out to me asking about imposter syndrome and my advice on imposter syndrome the day that I was going to give a keynote speech. It's hilarious to me because a couple of years ago, I couldn't have possibly imagined myself standing here and providing advice on how to get sober, and better yet, even beyond getting sober, how to live your best life and how to truly be happy and to live a fully engaged, fulfilling life. So, I gave Travis a couple of pointers. I said, hey, your program's great, and I told him all of the foundations that you've built into there are things that make sense. They're things that I use in my program as well. And he went on to say some like incredibly kind and flattering things about the podcast and the advocacy that I do. And that was really the boost that I needed. And also the way that I could completely revise this intro because the original version wasn't exactly sticking the landing. And it really kind of launched me into the confidence that I needed to stand here today and talk to you guys. And this is what we do in the fellowship, in the community of recovery, is we pick each other up. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. And I stand here today thinking that I'm going to share my entire story with you. I'm going to share the ugliness. I'm going to talk to you about my time in rehab, which was in the early spring of 2019. And I'm going to talk to you about the program that I've built that has me living my best life. Now, when I was in rehab, I learned a lot of things, learned a lot of tools. And one of the things that absolutely stood out to me was this adage. We had a lot of folks from AA who came in and spoke to us. And a guy said, when you go looking for a sponsor, when you go looking for people to surround yourself, when you get out of here, look for the people who have what you want. Total mind blow, because it made so much sense, right? In all of my life with this imposter syndrome, I was looking for love in all the wrong places. I was constantly trying to fit into clubs where I never felt comfortable. So this gave me the opportunity to really re-rack and be like, what do I truly want? Whether that be somebody's success, their business success, their success as a runner, their kindness, their aura. It was like, I get to finally be honest and find people after I'm discharged and find the people who have what I want. So as I share my story with you and I share some, humble tips and pointers and the stuff that I put together in my program, I can stand here confidently and believe that there are going to be a couple of things that could be something that you want. And I'm so excited and humbled to be the guy here talking to you about it. Now, there is this robust community when it comes to recovery, a running recovery community. It's a beautiful thing because, running to me, honestly, has kind of become my replacement addiction. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I ran a marathon the day after I got out of treatment, the day I was discharged from rehab, the day after, I should say. And now bear in mind, I had been training for this marathon for months and months. I didn't just do it on a whim, but I'd been working my way up to this for so long. And all of my life, I had been running from my problems. And now on that day, I truly felt that I had started running towards something. And it was such an emotional race. And I got hit with a cramp about 8 miles into the thing. And I never get cramps when I'm running. It's kind of, the way of God just throwing me a big fat curveball and saying, hey, you really think you're going to do this? And I hung with it for 18 miles. And I remember the young man who I saw in the medical tent, who gave me the electrolyte wafer, taught me how to sort of rub the cramp out in case it acted up again and stretch it out. I saw him again when I crossed the finish line. And I remember finishing, and I actually set a personal best in that race, which is absolutely insane. And it really speaks to the fact that that was my first step toward running toward a good life. So I crossed the finish line, emotional, just blubbering, tears rolling down my face. And he slaps one of these bad boys around my neck. Look at this. Just substantial, right? Beefy. And this perfect stranger says to me, hey, man, I didn't think that you were going to make it. Because, of course, he saw me when I was in such pain at 8 miles. And that's when the tears really started to gush. Because I know he didn't mean it the way that he meant it. But yeah, it resonated as I didn't think I was going to make it to here. Like, I didn't think that on a grander scale that I would be standing here talking to this guy after the finish line. So I'm exhausted. I'm emotional. And after I saw him, I looked over and I saw my buddy, Johnny Mack, waiting for me along the fence. Now, I have an incredible circle of friends, but this amazing human being was the only non-relative of mine who came and visited me in rehab. And so I hobbled over to him. I gave him the biggest hug and I said, buddy, thank you for being here. Look what I can still do. He said, yeah, I'm proud of you, man. So I hobble my way around the metal fence, come around to this enormous crowd, and I find my dad pretty quickly because my dad eternally has this camera hanging around his neck. He can't find the guy without him taking pictures. I stagger my way over to him and I hug him and I just said, Dad, I'm like, look at me, Dad, I'm still here. And look what I can still do. He told me that he was proud of me and it had never meant more. Now, that afternoon of the race, I sat down and there was something in rehab that was drilled to us in terms of like documenting our story. And one of the forms that takes is journaling. Now, I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. Writing's been my jam since I was a kid. Been a newspaper man for many, many years, freelance writer. But in this instance, I'm sitting down that afternoon after the race to journal my story, which was different. And I quickly realized that this journal was going to become a memoir. It took me about a year to write it. It was deeply personal. It was hard to write, went through the editing process. And it was 100 days after I was discharged out of treatment that I came out as a recovering alcoholic. And I put it all out there on social media. And that fall, I launched a podcast, and all of these things, all of these prongs of my advocacy started taking shape. And I got to a point where I'm shopping out the memoir to agents. And when you're doing that, you have to do market research. You have to look up, okay, if I'm in a bookstore, what books are going to be on the shelf next to my book, right? And so I'm doing my research and I'm like, oh my gosh, this Katra Corbett woman has run nearly 200 races of 100 miles or more. She's 27 years clean, a former meth addict. I'm like, that's incredible. And then I read about Charlie Engel, this guy who was a former drug user, gets clean and runs across the Sahara Desert. Now, just an aside, Katra's been on the podcast and Charlie's going to be on soon. Little, shameless plug. But so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what do I have? Like, again, with the imposter syndrome, it's like, who am I, right? So I call a close friend of mine. I'm like, I don't know that I have anything here. I don't know that I have something. All these people did such extraordinary things. And she stops me and she says, look, you know what you have, because I was a marathoner. I was a newspaper man. I was the editor of a local newspaper. I had an incredible wife, still do somehow. Amazing, brilliant children. Like, on the surface, man, it was, how could this guy be suffering, right? How can this guy have a problem? She was like, there are tens of millions of people who are going through what you went through and need your story. And it shook me to my core because, man, it's true. I was an incredibly high functioning alcoholic. And, when I decided to go to rehab, it was like, again, with the imposter syndrome, like, do I really have to go to rehab with my Mickey Mouse problems? Because I hadn't hit this Hollywood rock bottom, right? We're going to talk more about that fallacy in a moment. But her push to do this and to realize that so many people are suffering through what I was living through. I'm eternally grateful for that conversation. Now, I'm going to talk about, like I mentioned, and you might have read it in the description, I'm going to kind of go through my program and the prongs that I use and that I continue to work on in order to be a very happy person, to be a good dad, to be a good husband, and most of all, to be a good human being to myself. They're tools that I work on while I'm out running, and I'll be working on for the rest of my life, but I will tell you that there's no greater paycheck. But first, in order to appreciate this happy, exuberant guy who's in front of you, you need the whole story, right? You need the backstory. And this is where there are folks who are tuning into this who I have to provide a trigger warning. It's very important because I need to tell you that I'm going to be discussing, some of the ugliness of my addiction. I'm going to be talking about alcohol use, drug use, and I'm going to be talking about suicidal ideations. So please have that trigger warning. I appreciate it. Now, I grew up in northeastern Wisconsin, kind of in the shadow of Green Bay, of Lambeau Field and Manitowoc. And you probably realize that drinking is a huge part of the culture in that neck of the North Woods. And I remember growing up thinking I was never going to touch alcohol because I saw the havoc that it absolutely the havoc that it wreaked on my household. One of my brothers was deep into alcoholism at one point. I watched the hell that my brothers put my parents through. I watched them fight with my father. I listened to my mom cry, and I was like, I'm never going to do that to my parents. So I was like, I'm never going to touch alcohol. And, I was a good kid that way. As my mom says, they hit the jackpot with me because they couldn't have taken one more like my brothers. But, as I got older, as so often happens, I joined a band. All of a sudden, we're out playing gigs. And again, the imposter syndrome, I needed to fit in. I needed to make sure that I wasn't ostracized because I wasn't drinking. So I would order the Malibu and diet. I would order, the drinks that tasted just enough like candy so I could choke them down and hang with everybody. So I wasn't ostracized. So nobody asked questions and nobody made me feel less than, which is, it's such an absolute scourge in our society. And not just at gigs, but like hanging out with the friends I was developing and hanging out with them. And the irony of all of this was that, I was the guy who I hated beer. I was the guy who was drinking like Smirnoff Ice in these malt beverages that anything I could drink that didn't taste like alcohol, right? Hated beer. But here's what happens when you try to fit in and you don't like something about yourself and you keep working on it. You keep trying to improve in this ugly way. I was terrible at drinking, but I practiced until I got really good at it. And by the time I got to college, I was like a freaking first ballot Hall of Fame drinker. And in college, you blend in with the lifestyle, but a fire was raging. After I graduated college, I started drinking alone. I had this romanticized idea that drinking and smoking marijuana made me a better writer, made me more interesting and more clever. Couldn't be farther from the truth, I understand now. However, I was caught up on that idea. And my wife, after we got married, we get married and I continue to hide it from her. And I came up with the most illustrious, ridiculous stories when she would find empty bottles and cans. Then we had our kids and I kept hiding it more. And it finally reached a point where I realized that I could get away with it while I was working. And this is where that ultra high functioning alcoholic thing comes into play, because I kept taking promotion after promotion after promotion until I became the editor of the small daily newspaper where we live. And when you work for a small daily newspaper, especially today, you not only edit the newspaper and lay out the plan, you have to cover things as well. You have to have a beat. And mine was crime and courts. So I endured sort of the trauma of going to the courthouse every day and going through court records and covering murder trials and shaken baby cases and stuff that really takes its toll on you. And so I would drink my way through every workday. I'd tool around the countryside. I'd vanish for a while. Folks, I would drink on my way to the courthouse. If you want an example of what a walking ticking time bomb I was, I would drink on my way to the courthouse. I would walk through the security sensors. I would be wanded by deputies, half in the bag, and they were none the wiser. I was a dumpster fire in plain sight. I was hiding it in plain sight and getting away with it. So I kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And I can't tell you the number of times that the unique thing about me was I would drink during the week and I would, try to get clean over the weekends. Like I said, I was training for a marathon. So I would drag my extraordinarily hungover butt out of bed every Tuesday and Thursday morning, and I would go out and I would run. I would sweat it out and I would say, today's the day. I got this. I had a good run. Today's the day that I'm going to turn this whole thing around. By the time I was driving to the office, I'd be stopping and getting a six-pack. Over the weekends, as we're getting closer to the marathon, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18-mile runs, I'd be suffering through them, feeling like I'm sweating it out completely, like clearing the system. This is the week that I got it. There was a point in the holiday season of 2018 going into 19 that our family took a little holiday getaway, and I was clean for a week. I was working out twice a day. I was like, I got this. January 2nd, on my way to the office, I was going to stop and get a six-pack on the way to work. And I'm on my way to get it. It's cold out. Don't realize how slippery it is. Go to execute a right turn and slide and hit another car, T-bone it, completely total the car. Thank goodness that the driver was unhurt. So I hang around, I deal with the police officer who came. I'd actually checked on the guy to make sure that he was okay. Everything clears out. My car still runs somehow. So what did I do? I went and I bought the beer anyway. Addiction is a crazy thing, isn't it? So, that was about 3 months before I checked into treatment. And one of the reasons why I continued down this path, and then I continued to convince myself that I could keep it up, was because I was checking all the boxes as dad and husband. Like I was just good enough of a father. And not big on screen shares, but this is the only one I'm going to show you, just to illustrate what was going on. When you look at the left side of this screen, that is the summer of 2018, and that guy is hung way over. We had taken our girls to Rockford to a women's baseball game, like the All-American Girls Baseball League, to a reunion game. I was so excited to teach them all about baseball. I suffered through that entire day because I was so stinking hungover. Nobody knew. Now look at the guy on the right. This is 1 week before I checked into rehab. Completely drunk in that picture. We were at this princess ball at Northern Illinois University, and there are my little angels, and there's their dad, completely schnockered. Nobody's any the wiser. It's insanity, but I know that there are so many people walking around the way that I was, suffering in silence. So how does it all come to a head, right? Well, I cannot tell you the number of times that I lay in bed at night, 2, 3 in the morning, saying that I needed to disappear. I had battled depression and anxiety all of my life. The alcoholism had driven me to a place where I wanted to end it all. And in hindsight, I can tell you that on a grand overarching basis, I was dead set on taking my life with alcohol. And finally, on Friday, March 22nd, 2019, drinking my way through the workday as usual, something happens in the office that afternoon and I snap. I go to the liquor store, I get what I think I need, I park by the airport, pin my ears back and I'm going to go for it. I was like, this is the day. This is it. I cannot take it anymore. I'm drinking and I get myself to the point where I feel like I'm at, the point of no return, about to black out, not sure what's going to happen. I have the illest of intentions. And here's where we're going to address that fallacy of rock bottom. Because folks think that you need this Hollywood rock bottom, right? That you need to lose your job, lose your family, lose your house, that you need to go to prison. Well, if you keep looking for a rock bottom, like the rock bottom, you're going to find a false bottom and another false bottom, and you're just going to keep finding bottoms, right? You can choose your rock bottom. Sometimes your rock bottom chooses you, and you only have to be open to it. And that afternoon, in my mind, it was like this neon sign screaming, message Kayla, message your wife, call her. And you might have heard of the technique of playing the tape forward, where if we feel tempted to drink, we consider what will happen if we do. And in that moment, I thought of my daughters. And I thought of, if I succeed in taking my own life, what is their reality going to look like? What is their future going to look like? What are those unanswered questions going to be like for them when dad, who was this happy guy, was seemingly always there for him, when they found out that daddy didn't want to be alive anymore? What was that going to do to their self-image and their self-worth? What the bottom line is that in that moment, as heartbreaking as that is, I said, enough is enough. And I messaged Kayla. I said, honey, I'm drunk. I need you to come get me, and I need help. And of course she did. Of course she did. She comes and picks me up, takes me home. I pack my go bag, and I catch an ambulance ride to the hospital. And I am just thrashing in the ambulance. I'm so angry at myself and disappointed in myself. And I remember that, I was screaming that my life as I know it is over. And I will never forget this. One of the paramedics puts his hand on my arm and says, would that be the worst thing in the world if your life as you know it is over? And it shook me. Because in that moment, I realized that I didn't have to live like that anymore. That if I could tear this thing down to the studs a bit, if I could go and get help, life could be different. So I go to the emergency department, and folks, I ended up sitting in the exact same room I had been in just a few weeks before that. And in that room, the few weeks before, I was presented with the folder of the materials of, here's where you can reach out to get help. Counseling or rehab, to go to treatment. And on that day, I wasn't ready. But on this day, this Friday afternoon, I was good and ready. She handed me the folder and I was like, yep, okay, get me there. Once I sober up, will you please take me there? And this is one of those areas where the system fails us. She was like, no, after you're discharged from here, you have to make the phone call yourself. Now imagine, a lot of you probably don't have to, but going through the weekend and having to stick to your guns and stick with the fact that you're ready to go. How do you keep that momentum, right? Well, fortunately for me, I got discharged from the hospital at 3 a.m. Kind of that, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here situation. I'm out in the parking lot and I'm thinking, can I walk home? Can I walk the couple of miles home? Or do I message my wife again, have her drag our 5-year-old daughters out of bed and come get me in the middle of the night? Well, of course, I chose the latter. And of course, she did, because she's super mom. She's super wife. She's super everything. So we get home. I get a couple of hours of sleep. And in the morning, we lock it in. Now is the time to call Gateway Foundation, where I did my rehab, and to get me a bed. And of course, we learned what we suspected, that it would be Monday, but before I'd get there. So I'm starting to think very practically. It's like, okay, how do I get to Monday? And what I decided to do was to reach out to the folks in my life, my closest friends and my family, and to tell them what was going on. And I was terrified of doing this. So many of my closest friends, they were my most prolific drinking buddies, right? But I called them And I level with them. I said, guys, I've been living in pain for a long time. I've been living in alcoholism for a while, and I am going to rehab on Monday. And I braced for the judgment. I braced for the shame. And universally, I was met with this message. I'm so sorry for what you've gone through. I had no idea. And I'm proud of you. I'm glad that you're going to get help because we love you and we need you here. And I was ready to do the work, right? And I got to work. I went to rehab on Monday and I dug in. And now we've reached that point of the story where we start to talk about the good stuff. Because I already mentioned it before. One of the big things that I took away from being in rehab was this idea of once you get out, look for the people who have what you want and keep those people in your life. Here's another concept that was huge for me while I was in treatment is that I'm a recovering people pleaser. So as I'm in there, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, will my wife ever be able to forgive me? What are people going to think of me? Are they going to embrace me? Am I going to lose all of my friends? And it was drilled home that yes, I had a lot of amends to make and I had a lot of work to do with my family, but it had to start with me. I had to learn to love myself and show myself grace and mercy and compassion. It's the old cliche, but it's true. They're cliches for a reason, that I needed to learn to love myself before I could love others. Now, that sort of dovetails with this next huge point that I learned in treatment. And APN Lodge, I just saw it on the other day, the good folks there, they were talking about it in their Instagram feed, and it's on the website, the importance of a psychiatric examination. I cannot possibly explain to you how pivotal a psychiatric examination was for me. Because, like I mentioned, been struggling with depression and anxiety all of my life. And seeing a psychiatrist for the first time in my life, and I want to pause here for a moment because a lot of us have gone to our family doctor and gotten the diagnosis of the quick diagnosis, and they give you a prescription, they throw the noodle at the wall and they hope that it sticks. Well, first off, because I was drinking so much, all the medications I'd taken over the years clearly were not working. But in treatment, I saw a psychiatrist for the first time. Cannot emphasize this enough. Your psychiatrist needs to be the one who diagnoses you and prescribes your medication. Okay, a little bit of a soapbox moment. Thank you for bearing with me. In seeing a psychiatrist, we established that in the past 10 years or so, when I'd occasionally gone to therapy and occasionally gotten prescribed medication, we were treating my anxiety and my racing thoughts rather than my depression. Well, the psychiatrist realized we need to flip that on its head. We need to treat your depression while also somewhat addressing your anxiety. And throughout all of this was the narrative that my mental illness was the root of my problem. And my alcoholism, my drinking, my self-flagellation, all of the hell I was putting myself through, that was the symptom as I was self-medicating to try to treat my mental illness. And here's what that did for me, is I realized that being an alcoholic did not make me a bad person. Having mental illness, having depression and anxiety, much like cancer, much like any diagnosis, made me a sick person who needed help, who needed treatment. And when I learned that, I realized that that gave me a puncher's chance in this thing, that if I managed my mental health properly, that I could beat this thing. Gave me so much confidence. Now, the last thing that I want to touch on from treatment is this, that we need to know our enemy, right? When it comes to addiction, when it comes to mental illness. I remember shortly after I got out of treatment, I attended AA meetings for a while, and we'll get into this in a moment, that AA is the most tried and true, long documented pathway to recovery for millions upon millions of people. For me, I discovered another sort of meeting called Smart Recovery, which I absolutely love. And in smart meetings, you do a little bit more of that live feedback with each other, where you're working on tools together, sharing stories and learning together. Well, in a smart meeting, finally, this guy, Bruce, love Bruce, but Bruce felt like he had an answer for everything. He stops me mid-sentence and he says, you need to stop saying fear. You need to stop using the word scared. You need to stop treating alcoholism like the boogeyman and looking over your shoulder and looking around corners. To a certain extent, Bruce was right. However, fear is not a bad thing when we make fear serve us. Fear is what keeps us safe. Fear is what keeps us from touching the hot stove. Fear, we wouldn't step into a cage with a lion, right? A select few of us might. But similarly, we wouldn't go to a house party if we are recovering alcoholics. Respecting and knowing our enemy is what keeps us happy and healthy. So learning that in treatment, that we need to know and respect and acknowledge the power of our enemy, was huge. So I'm so grateful for my time in treatment. And I hope those of you who are watching from APN Lodge, I hope you're getting the most out of your experience. And I hope you're doing the work, man. Because I said it before, it is work, but there is absolutely no greater paycheck in the world. With that, as promised in your little preview for my speech, let's get into my program, okay? And for this, I enlisted 2 world-class artists to provide some visuals that will help you. Now, all the prongs of my program, I can work on all of them while I am running. My daughter, Anna, created this breathtaking design of the finish line of a race. Forgive the mirror effect, or the mirror effect with the finish line. But look at this community of folks coming together and completing a race, and all the folks on the sidelines cheering them on. When I'm out running, I can work on all of my tools. I also find community and fellowship. On the note of community and fellowship, meetings. My daughter Elise created this one. Recognize the Zoom layout, because now meetings, you can find one at virtually any hour of the day, virtually. And she seems to have captured a lot of demographics. And like I mentioned, oh, and please note the coffee here, because you've got spaghetti and meatballs and peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and chocolate. So many things go together. Nothing goes together better, though, than a hot cup of coffee in a meeting, right? Now, to delve into this a little bit further now, what I was alluding to before, AA versus smart recovery. When I got out of treatment, when I was discharged, my wife took me directly to an AA meeting. I did the 30 meetings in 30 days, and I also dabbled with smart recovery. And to me, the smart recovery was brilliant because of that live feedback aspect. Also, if you are someone who struggles with the higher power element of AA, smart recovery is very secular. I'm going to get to the spirituality thing in a moment, because this is not a matter of saying that the higher power thing doesn't speak to me. I just like the live interaction of smart. AA and smart, however, similarly, you can find a meeting at virtually any time of day, virtually. Sorry for the Department of Redundancy department. Because it's different strokes for different folks. Because I remember when I went to my first AA meeting, walking through that door was one of the hardest things that I did, just physically walking through the door into a brick and mortar building and showing my face and saying that I'm a recovering alcoholic. It was hard. It also paid off because it put me down the road to recovery. However, utilizing the virtual meetings is a new thing and very helpful for a lot of folks. All right, next up, therapy and medication. I see my therapist, I take my medications, and I cannot possibly endorse it more. This one comes from Anna, although you'll see that Dad contributed a little bit. I pretended to be an artist for a few minutes. But all of these emotions that I discuss in therapy, some of them are obvious. We think of therapy, we think of, talking about our sadness or our anger or our anxiety. But I don't know about you, but once I got really good at self-medicating, I couldn't bear to be happy anymore. I didn't want to deal with any of the emotional swings anymore because I got so used to self-medicating. So it's hard for me to even allow myself to be happy. I'm still unpacking these things to this day. Again, comes back to imposter syndrome, where I have a hard time believing that I actually truly deserve to be happy. However, working through all that stuff in therapy. And we already talked about the medication, folks, in that when I was prescribed medication, I'm just going to go into this for a moment. It was a high dosage. And over time, I continued to see my psychiatrist and we adjust accordingly as time goes on. Cannot emphasize enough how important that is. All right, next up, mindfulness meditation. I love meditating. It helps me stay grounded. It helps me be here now, right? I love Eastern practices, Buddhism, all that jazz. And you might be wondering what this stuff is. That's grounding. Like when I get really anxious, when I get really worked up and I feel like my skin is crawling, I use grounding, which is basically pointing at an object like a simple light switch and saying, that's a light switch. Just centering myself and bringing myself back down by pointing at an object and naming it. And when I was out on the marathon, I was pointing at a lot of signs and saying, that's a road sign. I'm okay. I know we get in the mirror effect, but grounding presence is what that reads. All right, next up. I promised I'd talk about this. Religion and spirituality. My relationship with my higher power is an ongoing process. I was born and raised Christian, Lutheran specifically. And I prayed a ton during the marathon. I still pray a lot, but it's a relationship that I'm working on. Like anything, it's not perfect and it doesn't have to be, as long as we're willing to do the work. The yin yang is on there because, like I said, I like a lot of Eastern practices too. This is where, like I mentioned, I like to live life a la carte, to build my own program. I build in the things that speak to me and fill my cup and fill my soul. Finally, this is an Elise special. Diet, good food, right? You got your pineapple with a mohawk over here. You got your broccoli, apple, orange, banana. Love these grapes up here. And I added the eggs because healthy cholesterol is good for you. Now, diet is huge for me. And, I mentioned my buddy Travis at the top. He's a chef. And he says something very important is that if you put garbage into your body, how do you think you're going to feel? And there's a lot to that. There's a lot to this microbiome stuff that we hear about. The old adage is you are what you eat. Well, there's a lot to that if you eat bad food, not only is it going to make you feel bad physically, but it's going to have a direct impact on how your brain works. And from the strict standpoint of recovery and living a happy, healthy life and not dealing with cravings and stuff, we make our worst decisions when we're tired, when our brains are tired. So if we take baby steps in building a better diet, our brains work better. We sleep better. My goodness, folks, the sleep. when we get clean and we eat well, the sleep is magnificent, right? So the last prong that I'm going to talk about is all of this. It's my advocacy. It's sharing my story, and it's being honest after so many years of hiding my addiction and being dishonest with everybody, including myself. So let's do the rundown of the benefits of this program, shall we? First off, like I mentioned, is this advocacy stuff, being truthful and developing this fellowship. I know it's not the same that we're not together, folks, but I can feel you through this. I know that you're grabbing onto some of this stuff, and I know that we have that connection. There are so many communities from, like I said, the meetings, the Instagram recovery community. Everywhere you look, there are people who are picking each other up. That's one of the things I love about the podcast is I have a guest on and they become my bestie. And then I connect with their friends and people. When you see somebody who has something that you want, latch onto that person, befriend them. Okay, I just mentioned it before. Another benefit of getting clean is the better sleep and better health. I love science, folks, and our cells are constantly regenerating themselves. Like right down here, I got a brand new liver, baby, because I believe it takes about a year for the liver to completely regenerate itself. So this crap liver that I thought was always going to be junk, brand new. Awesome, right? So the better sleep, man, I always lead with that when I talk about people who are sober curious. I'm like, wait till you give up alcohol for a while. Wait till you sleep so well. Now, a lot of us in recovery, we've used the app, the tracker app that tells us, okay, you've been this many days sober and you have saved this amount of money by giving up alcohol. And that number will shock you. Now, there's another little piece of data in there. It's going to tell you how much time you saved by quitting drinking. To me, I can always find a way to hustle and get more money, right? But I cannot create more time. And right now, right here, being here with you guys, this is all that I'm guaranteed is what's happening right now. And this kind of comes back to the mindfulness meditation thing of being here now and being connected with people. And in that spirit, when you get clean and you're thinking clearly and you're feeling all the feels, you establish these deep relationships with folks, deeper than you possibly could have imagined. And this is your family, obviously. This is your close friends. This is your coworkers. This is everybody who is in your life. You feel a deeper connection because isn't this what we want as humans? That's what we're wired to do, is to make connections with people. Now, on a personal basis, one of the greatest benefits of me getting sober was that I finally realized my dream of becoming an ultra marathoner. 2.5 weeks ago, my amazing wife and I completed our first 50K race, which is 31 miles. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. And while I was out there on the course, man, you go an hour at a time without seeing people. You know, you're in the dark, you're wearing your headlamp, you're just looking at the ground. It gets very, very lonely and scary. And I almost lost it out there. I almost had a nervous breakdown, like mile 27, 28. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But I was like on the brink of a panic attack. But I used the grounding. I used my tools. And it's obvious to say that I couldn't have done that if I was in the throes of alcoholism. But I honestly feel as though I couldn't have accomplished that if I hadn't lived through alcoholism and I didn't have that juxtaposition of what it was like then and what it is like now. And I crossed that stinking finish line and I got this beautiful, legit medal for the Hennepin 50K. Mwah. So here's the point I want to leave you with. And I'm so stoked to hear your questions, folks. I love questions. I love the dialogue that we can create here. But I want to leave with this. You know, we talk about one day at a time. When it came to that ultra marathon, we spent 26 weeks training for that thing. And then finally, we ran the race. Now, what if we hadn't enjoyed the journey, right? What if it was all about the accomplishment? Then when you accomplish it, then what, right? Did you enjoy the journey? Because now the accomplishment's over, and what did you learn from it? We have to avoid doing this in our lives. We have to avoid exclusively focusing on goals because, like for instance, the soberversary. I always worried, what happens when I hit my 1-year soberversary? What happens the day thereafter? You know, like what's next? What happens when you get the promotion that you wanted at your job, right? What happens when you get your diploma? We better enjoy the journey because the journey is where the growth happens. So I love goals, man. In a couple of months here, I'm going to run 101K, which is 63.1 miles through the rolling hills of Council Bluffs, Iowa. It's going to be December 12th. It's going to be horrible, and I'm going to crush that thing. But I would be remiss if I didn't enjoy the journey. That's recovery, man. That's recovery. In that if we enjoy this journey, which we will, recovery has a way of taking care of itself. So with that, folks, I hope you can grab onto some of that stuff. it's time for me to turn it back over to Anna Mason. From what I gather, Anna is going to perform a medley from Oklahoma. Do I have that right, Anna? Is that what you're doing now?
That's so wrong, but very good try.
I was hopeful. I was very hopeful.
It was a good prep. Yeah, it's not Oklahoma. It's actually the Music Man. Here I go. Just kidding. No, thanks so much for sharing your story. It's we're getting some thank yous rolling in here to the chat, and then some thank yous into the Q&A too. I think I really appreciate the vulnerability that you offered, and very impressed as a person who is a wannabe runner, I suppose you could call me. Very impressed with a marathon and an ultra marathon.
You know, the thing about that is that you don't have to be a marathoner to do something extraordinary, right? Everybody's great is different. And you know, I learned that a lot when we do a marathon and you have like the out and back where you see like the same scenery twice, but you run by other runners. And when you kind of latch onto their energy and celebrate what they're doing, everybody has their own great. So I appreciate all the dap for the distance, man, but I admire the 5Kers. I admire the people who simply walk to the corner for the first time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's so true. And like you said, I mean, even with food, right? It's like the little things sometimes that can be really good victories and turning points even. All right, we got a few questions here. So first one, did you have any aha moments while you were running the marathon?
Holy buckets. Absolutely. Where do I begin? You know, there are a lot of moments. You know, running takes a toll on your body, obviously, but it takes a toll on your mind. And there were a lot of moments where like my mind wanted to push me like the devil on my shoulder back into the negative thoughts that I had, you know, when I was in the thick of addiction. The thoughts of, you know, you're not good enough, you are an imposter. And while I was out there, it started to finally click that, you know, those negative thoughts are not doing anybody any assistance. So it was in those moments where I'd clear my mind, I would ground myself, I would pray, and I'd work on the stuff that I learned in treatment, you know, in that I would literally look down at my feet, be like, to hell with you, brain, look at what I'm doing. You know, it's kind of the grounding and just appreciating the fact that you can run. And that's something that I know that this doesn't pertain to the marathon, but as we've gotten into ultra running, I've come to fall in love with ultras because it's no longer about how fast can I go. As a matter of fact, it's like, you know, we're looking at our watch and being like, okay, I'm going too fast. I need to slow down. To simply run with a smile and appreciate the fact that we can run and being grateful for that opportunity. So that's the biggest aha moment for me with running. And that's a pretty recent one to have that revelation.
Yeah, that's so good. I think I've been in my own work recently, I've been trying to have some grace with little Anna, right? And sometimes I get frustrated at my current self for not being able to do more or not being, you know, further along in my healing. But what little Anna needs is usually to be cheered on and to say like, wow, look at what you're doing now. This is great. Keep going forward. Because if I'm beating up little Anna, nobody's going to make any progress. And I had that kind of a similar aha moment running the other day. It was like, I can either beat myself up right now that I can't run faster, or I can cheer little Anna on and say like, we're doing it. This is great.
That's so beautiful.
Game changer. Yeah. Okay. Next, this is a question from me. You had your daughters draw your visual aids, which I loved. That was so fun. How do you talk to them about mental health and about addiction? I mean, how has it changed from, and even how do you talk to the rest of your family as a person who previously hid your addiction and is now an advocate?
That's an awesome question. And let me start with my wife, in that my wife, Kayla, she does not have mental illness. She never had a problem having a drink or two and saying that that's enough because I want to feel good in the morning. So there has been a lot of learning for the two of us throughout all of this. She has learned that there are times that you cannot fix me, because my wife is the ultimate fixer, man. She's amazing. But there are times that I cannot be helped and I simply need my space. I have learned that when I am in my dark moments, when I feel even the slightest impulse to talk to her about it, I do now, rather than, festering or not wanting to burden her. That's a huge thing for folks like me, where we don't want to burden people, with our struggles. But we both get better when we talk about it, because she gains a greater understanding of what I'm going through, and vice versa. When it comes to my children, we have very age appropriate discussions about a lot of this stuff, but they know that daddy is 875 days sober. We celebrate it. We have a party when I hit milestones. I have open and honest conversations with them about mental health. Not just from the standpoint of like an education on a broad level, but I see markings of them having some of the stuff that daddy has. And I don't want them to have it, but I also know that there are certain things that you might call a syndrome or a shortcoming that can be leveraged to be powerful. Like, one of my daughters is extraordinarily empathetic. To me, that's a superpower, to care about people that deeply and to feel what they're feeling so that you can help them. So, we use age appropriate language. However, we're not going to sugarcoat too much stuff at the risk, or at the, I don't want to dumb it down so much that it takes too long for them to understand it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's amazing what kids can understand, right? And it's so easy to look at the way that they play and think like, oh, they're not struggling with these big concepts, or they can't understand this thing yet. And I think there's so much opportunity for parents to, and even like aunts and uncles and grandparents, to be able to talk to kids and create a space where like your feelings are safe, and we celebrate your strengths, and we talk about your weaknesses, and we don't have to hide all of that stuff. And yeah, I love the age appropriate language thing too. That's really important.
It is. It really, I think that the language is always secondary to the understanding, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Okay, I have a question that came in through the chat here. This person says, they love that you had so much support on your journey, that when you talk to people about your addiction, you were met with all this support and not judgment, and that is amazing. But that's not the story of everyone. And so this person says many addicts have lost friends due to their disease, or even family members. What additional advice do you have for people who are feeling kind of lonely, or have lost friends or family? How do they keep moving forward when their support system isn't rallying behind them as much?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. And look, I have no illusions about my privilege. I am spoiled freaking rotten with my support system. I think the one thing that I would point out is that never assume that somebody isn't waiting to help, or that they won't. Like with everybody who I reached out to, some of my best friends who I reached out to that weekend before I went into rehab, some of them are brewers, that not Milwaukee Brewers, that'd be pretty cool. But they brew craft beer. Like, it is part of their livelihood. So it'd be easy to make the assumption that I'm no longer going to have that relationship with them, because it is such a big part of our story. I've heard from a lot of folks who they were terrified of reaching out to a family member because they didn't think that they would be supported, and they were pleasantly surprised at the response and the sort of compassion that they showed them. The other thing that I would recommend is that there is, as I alluded to, this huge recovery community out there where perfect strangers are willing to listen and are willing to pick you up, whether it be in the social media community, whether it be with virtual meetings. There is just a treasure trove of places where we can reach out and feel supported now that we didn't have 10 years ago. But I definitely just want to say that, and circling back to it, that yes, I am spoiled rotten with the support that I have, and my heart goes out to people who are struggling. But you can have an aha moment or make a connection at any time if you're simply open to asking for help or trying to initiate a conversation.
Yeah, it's the road is harder, right? If you don't have the support around you, but that support is waiting. It's just about finding it. And it's not necessarily the people you think, always, hopefully, but yeah, support groups I think are crazy. And even like running you talked about. And I like that you said that recovery is a family altogether. Like it's not just AA is a family. It's not just APN is a family. It's recovery in general. I mean,
And I
that's
mean, one thing that I'll mention too is if you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I get into some of these communities? Like my podcast is not the only podcast on the market. It's actually like a super saturated market, and there's a lot of great ones out there. And if you get into a podcast and you like what it has to offer you, it's kind of like we talk about with people. If there's a podcast that speaks to you or a live stream show that speaks to you, if it has what you want, get into it. Reach out to the host of the podcast. Look up ways to get in touch with the guests, because that's the thing about folks in recovery is that we all feel this sense of service to help other people out. Like that's become part of our story. So never assume that a perfect stranger isn't willing to step up and listen to you and offer some help.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Um, okay, we'll do one more question and then I have additional questions, but we don't have time. We want to try to wrap here pretty soon. So you and I can connect and maybe we can get some of the answers to these questions out on socials this week.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
Okay, awesome. Okay, last question. What still challenges you the most? So you seem like you're in a really good place. You've made so much progress. What are you still working on?
I love that question because it's absolutely true that I was just telling a friend of mine yesterday that it's like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? That I'm waiting for something to go wrong because things are incredibly, like things are really good in my hula hoop. However, the struggle for me is continuing to like unpack my past.
Yeah.
And to be willing to go back to childhood trauma, to be willing to go back to shed some. Look, I hate to like end this on kind of a jarring note, but it wasn't until I got clean and sober that I realized that I was molested as a child. And so I have to go back and unpack that stuff so that I can figure out how it's informed my experience. And so that I can resolve some of that stuff. Because there are still lots of really dark pockets in my brain that are probably hampering my happiness. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of like sticking with it with therapy and continuing to work on it. It really, it's to really come around and to keep coming around to the fact that I deserve good things. Like that remains a struggle where somebody will pay me a compliment and my skin will just crawl. Like there's something to that. So that's something I'll always be working at in counseling and trying to unpack. So, that'd probably be the biggest struggle is just, continuing to work on myself.
I think that's great. I mean, it's really important. I remember it was a speaker series, I guess a couple months ago that someone said, how do you know when you're done with healing? How do you know that you've healed? And it's not that place. There's victory in the healing progress, but we don't have this like end goal of now I'm better and I'm done. I'm done with all my therapy. I'm done with all my medication. I'm done reaching out for support. I can talk about all my problems in past tense. There is progress that can be made so that we feel fulfilled and we feel loved and we feel like we have a purpose and that happiness. And there's work to be done to continue on that journey. And that includes sharing stuff that you're working on right now. I think it is so much easier to share things that we have already overcome than it is to share what you're struggling with. But that current day sharing is what can make a huge difference. So Yeah.
I'd also say lighting. Lighting is something that I'm working on. I mean, the elephant in the room. I thank you for hanging with me, folks. Definitely identified a place where I can improve things.
Right. We can't always control everything, right?
Right.
Yeah. So someone asked, how can we access the recording of this story to share with someone else? What a wonderful question. Something that we love to hear. We know that if you're watching, you hopefully and probably are not the only person in your life who could benefit from some inspiration of a rock bottom, getting to even to choose your rock bottom, like Christopher said, and go from there. So this will be available on YouTube starting tomorrow. So you can also find it on our website, but the quickest place you're going to find it is our YouTube channel, APN Lodge on YouTube. And we also have some more speaker series coming up. This is a monthly thing. So Christopher, I will say goodbye to you. Thank you so much for sharing. Follow Christopher on Instagram, 40,000 steps. Is that right? On Instagram?
That's right. At 40,000_steps. Anything and everything you could possibly want to know about me and my advocacy is at 40,000steps.com. That's where you'll find all the links to the podcast and everything that I'm up to.
Great. So yes, 40,000 steps. I will certainly be a new listener of that podcast as well. We really appreciate your time here today, Christopher. And to everyone who's watching, thank you so much for being here. It's really beautiful that we get to have this place where we can share our stories. And we know that, that the testimonials of others can sometimes push us forward. So thank you for coming to the APN Lodge Speaker Series. Check on YouTube for the video of this tomorrow. And we'll see you next month back. So check your emails for the speaker series for next month. Thanks, Christopher. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
We'll see you at the next one.
Bye-bye.